Hello, this is Gary Marr from Woodstock Community College. This screen capture is for my SAS 150AB students. And in this screen capture, I wanted to cover an example of array processing. I've got two examples. The first one is Python. The second one is just pseudocode. There are more pseudocode examples in the textbook and also inside the files section of Canvas. But for my first example, I wanted to show it to you in Python, mostly because I want to execute it for you, show how it works, how it runs to completion. And since Python is pretty much the same as pseudocode, Python doesn't have a lot of syntax requirements except maybe indentation of code blocks. So when I write my pseudocode, I can pretty much get fairly close to Python and not confuse the reader or the person who's picking up this code and going to turn it into source code in whatever programming language they're going to choose. So for this one, I'm going to call this, and I'm going to have several references to arrays. But Python actually knows it as a list. It's just a different semantic. It's the same thing. They both have a number of elements. They both have subscripts. I'm going to define a new data element called names array. Notice the plural. Give it a clue. It's going to hold multiple values because an array is a collection of multiple values. It's going to hold three names: Mo, Larry, Curly. I put a comment line above it showing you the subscripts: 0, 1, 2. Line 8 is going to be line 8 through 10 are just helper variables. The first one defines the first element in the array, which is always 0. Name is just going to be the person's name as I process it, Mo, Larry, or Curly. And then finally, array elements. This is a little bit of Pythonism here. Length, or len, is a Python function they give to you with a language. So this would be different maybe in JavaScript or C++. But what it's going to do is going to tell me how many elements are in this array. So in this case, it's 3. Okay. It's got two loops, an indeterminate and a determinate loop. Indeterminate loops, while loops process until they're false. A for loop processes some set number of times, so it's determinate. The first example it says is 0, less than the number of elements, 3. First time through it is, because it's a 0. It's going to process the 0 element of the array, which would be Mo. It's going to say is Mo equal to Larry? Nope. So it's going to pass this if block, come down, add 1 to the count. Okay. It'll be now 1. Is 1 less than 3? Yup. So now it's going to read the value of Larry, print that to the screen. It's going to say is value from subscript 1 Larry? Yes, it is. So now it's going to say found it and print some information to the screen. And then break. All break does is it basically says, okay, I'm done processing the loop, leave, because I found what I'm looking for. If I had multiple Larrys to look for, I would take that statement out and continue to loop and would find other Larrys. But I only have 3 elements, and Larry's only one of them, so I know I'm done. The determinate loop is definitely some Pythonism. The for loop isn't. Most all languages support determinate loops as for loops. But the syntax is a little different. Name is a variable that it's going to be looking for inside the element. In other words, that's each element subscript is going to be named. And essentially what it's going to do is loop for as many top members or elements as it has in the array. So it's going to know when to stop. It's going to print out that first element, which will be 0 and Mo. And it's going to say, is Mo equal to Larry? Nope. And when it finds Larry, which is the second one, it's going to say found and Larry's name. Okay, to run this in Python now, move this down here so you can see it. It's not asking me for an input, or it's not stopping me at all. This is simply just processing all those instructions. All looks good. And that's a very simple array using a determinate and indeterminate loop to process information stored in this data element, this list called names array. Second example is using parallel arrays which are matched by subscript. This is one that I talked about a little bit in the lecture, and it's one that's good to go over. This also exists as a Python program, but this is the pseudocode version. This is essentially going to capture some information regarding the name of the student and their score. So I've got some working variables up top here. I definitely know it's pseudocode because start doesn't exist in Python. It's using a Python comment symbol, but num and text and all stuff, that's not found in Python. That's just stuff that probably would be more likely to be seen in a C family programming language like, JavaScript, Java, C++, C#. But I'm going to throw it in there just to help me define what's happening, because anything goes with pseudocode as long as it describes the logic and that the person who's going to code this out for me can understand it, because it's in primarily English terms, phrases. Here I've got one constant. I know that because it's in capital letters. Also, it's commented, called class average. I've got a function or module called main. And looks like that's all I have in this one. Okay. So the function gets loaded in memory, and then it's called right here. So that's the first line of the program. It has no parameters, and it's obviously a void function because it's not equating into anything, so it's not going to return anything. So if I go up here to main, what's main going to do? And the point of this, by the way, is to show you that arrays can be used with functions. They can be used with while loops, with if statements, all the above, because each element of that array is like a variable, if you will. So I'm going to come up here and ask how many students I'm going to have in this particular running of the logic, and I give that into the students variable. I assign two empty arrays, one for students, one for scores, or one for names, one for scores. I ask for, and then I'm going to go for less than the number of students I specified. So if I said 5 students, it'll go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and stop. And for each one, it's going to ask for a name, and it's going to put that in student score. It's going to ask for store, and put that in score. And then it's going to do a check. It's going to say student score less than 0. Well, that's a bad score. Else, it's going to say, okay, fine. Then what you gave me for student score, I'm going to put to the student array. And what you gave me for student name, I'm going to put to the name array. And the only one I would probably like to change this a little bit, since typically we hold multiple values in arrays, a better name for these would be plural. So let me just fix that real quick. I just noticed that. Whenever you fix code after it's written to be clearer or more concise, that's called refactoring. Happens all of the time. So here I go. I've said now it's plural, which I think is a much better way of expressing that. And this happens to be some Pythonisms here. Append, and the other languages have this too, simply says, okay, in this data element, which is an array, it has a bunch of functions built into it, one of which is called append, and its whole purpose is to take whatever values inside the parentheses, because it is a function, and put that at the end of the array. So all this is going to do is put that score at the end of the array and put their name at the end of the array. But it's two different arrays. One is for student, one's for score. But since these both started off as empty, and since I'm adding the score and the name at the same time, whatever is that element in score will correspond to the person who got that score in the name element. It's a parallel, if you will. So if I put my name, Gary, for the first element of the names array, then the first element in the scores array would be my score. I had one to count, and I process second two until I'm all done. Then I print out the number of the students that are in that scores array using, again, a Python function called length. And I think JavaScript, it's L-E-N-G-T-H, it's length spelled out. And then what I do below here, and I can use a for loop or a while loop, I simply loop through the scores array. And since score array relates to names array, I'm going to add my score to a total score. I'm going to list the person's name and their score line by line. So I get this nice little report. It's going to have their name, their score, the name, the score, the name, the score for all 4 students. At the very end, it's going to show me what the average would have been for the class, or excuse me, for that student. So if, no, I did it back. I'm sorry, for the class, because I'm doing multiple students here, not a student, multiple tests. I can modify it to do that, but I'm not good at today. A good assignment, though. So what this would do at the end would simply show me each student's name and next to it the score. And at the very last line, it would show me the average for the class. And again, this has been written for Python also. And this is almost Python now. There's just a few changes I would make to get to run for Python. But more importantly, it's just another example of array processing. Hopefully this helps. If you have any questions, please ask away. Thank you.